What would you do if the aisles you walked down suddenly stretched longer than they should? If a customer you just rang up appeared again at the back of the line? Or if the stockroom whispered your name when you're the only one there? These are not just strange thoughts, but chilling encounters that Dollar Tree employees and late-night visitors have claimed to experience. Welcome back to my channel, Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From eerie voices in the stockroom to aisles that bend reality itself. Every story tonight is a chilling mystery waiting to unfold. Which story creeped you out the most? Tell us in the comments. Story 1. The endless aisle. I always thought night shifts at the Dollar Tree were easy. Quiet. Predictable. The kind of hours where the loudest thing in the building is the ice machine coughing to life, and the doors make that soft hiss when you lock them. If something fell off, it was never more than stale candy or a crooked peg hook. That is what I told myself every time I volunteered to close. That is what I believed right up until the night the store learned my routine better than I did. We closed at 10. I watched the last customer leave with a bag of balloons and a single picture frame. I turned the key on the front doors and felt the solid click that always made me breathe a little easier. The strip mall outside was a black mirror where my face floated over the parking lot lights. I flipped the door sign to closed. The clock above the registers whispered over to midnight while I counted down drawers and did the cash drop. The store settled like a body falling asleep. You notice it when you are alone. The ceiling panels exhale. The cooler hum shifts into a lower note. The air freshener hisses on a timer in aisle 3. I walked past the party section and into aisle 7 and stopped with a sudden feeling in my throat, like the air had thickened. From the end cap, aisle 7 looked longer than it should. Not by much, just enough for my brain to hesitate. I could see all the way to the back wall, and yet it felt farther away, like someone had dragged it a few feet overnight. I listened and heard a cart will squeal once. Not a rolling sound, just a single tired cry. It came from deep in the aisle and died without an echo. I told myself it was the cart corral shifting on the tile, or a metal peg settling under too many packs of off-brand batteries. I set my clipboard on the counter and started my routine. It was the routine that kept me sane. First the garbage, then cardboard, then end caps, then face the candy, then restock seasonal. If I did everything in that order, I could walk the store with my eyes closed. I went into the office to call my manager because he had promised to stay late and help me catch up. His coffee was there on the desk. His charger was plugged into the wall. His jacket hung over the chair like a person who had just stepped out and would be right back. I stared at the back of that chair for a long minute and felt the tiny idea that he might already be in the back, checking a pallet. I left the office door cracked so I could hear the walkie if it chirped. I grabbed a roll of trash bags and started with the small cans at the end of each aisle. Aisle 3, easy. Aisle 4, easy. When I reached aisle 7 again, the aisle felt a little longer. I frowned to the floor. It was only 3 bays more than the candy aisle across from it, and I knew that count by heart. I checked the signs. The overhead placards still said snacks. The aisle markers still had the right numbers. When I raised my head, the shelves seemed to squeeze inward a fraction, like a breath held in a tight chest. I took a step and felt the tile under my foot groan. The sound came from a little too far ahead of me. The price tags were the first thing that told me something was wrong. On the battery pegs, the SKU number was the same for every hook. Not just the same item. The same tag, repeated over and over. I slid one out and compared it to the next. Identical. My hands felt clumsy. I looked back at the end cap behind me and saw a mirror of the cleaning supplies end cap from 3 aisles over. Same bleach, same spray, except one space was empty where there should have been a generic glass cleaner. I remembered stocking it earlier. I remembered setting the label, just so. It was simply not there. I went to the monitor behind the counter to shake off the goose flesh. The cameras always calm me. You think being watched would make you anxious, but when you are alone, the grid of tiny views feels like company. I tapped the button for the store floor and watched my own figure walking aisle 7. Only I was not walking. I was sitting still on the stool behind the counter. The version of me on the screen turned left, then right, like an insect caught in a circle of salt. I leaned closer. The timestamp stuttered then jumped back, then rolled forward as if someone had their thumb on a dial. One frame showed a figure at the far end of an aisle. It was just one frame, a smear of green, a face that faced the camera without any features because the frame cut to the next one and the aisle was empty again. I rewound. I could not land on it a second time. I told myself the DVR was on its way out. I told myself our manager kept threatening to replace it. I went back to work because the store expects you to ignore anything that cannot be scanned or counted. The candy aisle is where the lengthening got bold. I had faced it earlier, right before close. It had 5 bays of chocolate and 4 bays of gummy and hard candy. I could face it blind. When I walked down the aisle now, there were 5 bays of chocolate. Good. Then 4 bays of gummy. Good. Then 1 extra bay of gummy that had not been there before. My breath snagged on my tongue. The peg hooks in the new bay were filled with off-brand sour worms I had never seen in our store. The label strip said new. The tiny font on the tag looked pre-printed. I ran my hand along the shelf and felt the cold seam where 2 sections met. A real seam. I backed up slowly until I could see both ends of the aisle at once. The back wall was not where it should be. I was not dealing with a memory mistake. I was dealing with a store that had decided to flex. At the far end, the overhead sign had a twin. There was a second sign for snacks. Each sign pointed to aisle 7. That was not how signs worked. I laughed once, a dry little sound, and then the walkie on my hip crackled. "You get out there, Scott." It was my manager's voice. It sounded close. Closer than it should through a walkie. I pressed the button and tried to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, doing cardboard next. You in the back." His answer came with a tiny clip at the end of each phrase, like someone cutting tape. "Counting seasonal. Could use a hand. After you face aisle 7. The last 3 words bit into my ear like a bug. After you face aisle 7. I had never heard him say it in that order. He always said face up or straighten or pull forward. Face aisle 7 sounded like a line read by someone who had learned our language by frequency and not by feeling. I tried to answer, but the walkie clicked into static, then went quiet. A bell on the front door chimed. Our bell only chimes when the doors open. They were locked. The little sound moved down the store the way you hear a phone vibrate on a wooden table, rattling through the display. My skin felt 2 sizes too small. I rounded the corner and saw him. He wore a green hoodie with the hood down and a ball cap pulled low. No logo. He had a basket in the crook of his elbow and empty hands. He smiled politely like someone who does not want to be a bother. "You know where the batteries are." "Aisle 7, I said before I thought. He nodded and walked that way like he already knew. The squeal of a cart wheel sounded again, even though he carried a basket. I waited a minute. I told myself to give him space. The monitor showed nothing. When I checked aisle 7, he was gone. No footsteps, no basket, just a new bay of sour worms and the double sign. I stood very still and listened. I heard him again. "You know where the batteries are." This time his voice came from the party aisle behind me. I turned and there he was, polite as before, basket empty again, hat brim low enough that I could not quite see his eyes. I pointed. He walked the same way, at the same pace. The squeal sounded. I followed him this time and found the aisle empty. A faint smell of dust hung in the air, the hot smell of cardboard warmed by lights that had hummed all day. A pallet jack mark on the floor cut toward the back like a black tongue and then stopped at the wall. I pushed through the stockroom door because that smell made my memory pull at something I did not want to look straight at. The corridor behind the door is narrow and crowded with metal racks and tape boxes. I know every scrape mark on the floor. That night the marks all pointed inward. Not a single scuff pointed out to the floor. It felt like the entire back room had dragged itself into the store and then tried to hide the tracks. I tried the emergency exit to remind myself that doors work. The bar did not budge. It felt like a hand was pressed against the other side. I held it for a long count and felt something change under my palm. The metal cooled and then warmed again, like breath through steel. I let go and took 3 careful steps back. Routine. Routine would save me. I want to get the pricing gun and a stack of tags. I started dropping 1 tag every 12 steps down aisle 7. I left them on the floor like breadcrumbs. On my second pass, I found 2 of them pinned under a cart that had not been there before. Its front left was a little bent. When I tried to move it, the squeal screamed against the tile. It sounded like a living thing scolded for making a mess. I pushed the cart against the end cap and stared at the camera bubble in the ceiling. I wanted to see myself from above. I wanted proof that I had a shape and a place. On the monitor, I watched my figure walk down aisle 7. There were 3 of me, staggered a few seconds apart, like a trail left by light. The first me turned the corner. The second me paused and looked up. The third me stayed and stared at the candy bay that had not existed yesterday. The timestamp slid back 2 minutes and then surged forward 30 seconds and then froze. For 1 heartbeat, the frame held a man at the end of the aisle. Green hoodie. He did not face me. He faced the wall. His head was tilted like someone reading tiny print. Then the frame rolled and he was gone again. The walkie clicked. Need a count in aisle 7. Voice like my manager, almost right. The kindness was in there. The impatience lived under it. But it ended in a clip that made my mouth go dry. On my way, I said, and set the walkie down on the counter. I did not want whatever came out of it pressed against my hip anymore. When I turned, aisle 7 had slid closer. There is no other way to say it. It had crept toward the front like a long finger pointing at me. The overhead sign hung low enough that I could have reached up and touched the edge if I wanted to. I did not want to. I walked into it without blinking and tried to count bays. 1, 2, 3. The numbers in my head would not stick. They rolled off the shelves and fell under my feet. I pulled a permanent marker from my apron and wrote a dot on the side panel at each bay as I passed. When I reached the end, I counted the dots. 11. I looked back at the start. The aisle had 9. I stood still and felt my routine creak. If the store wanted me lost, it had already won. If the store wanted something else, it would ask in a language it trusted, which was action. So I played the only card I had. I gave a perfect close. I started at the front door and worked backward. I straightened every mat. I wiped the fingerprints from the glass, cooler doors until I could see my face in the reflection. I uncrumpled every candy bag that was not aligned and faced each one with a clean pull to the edge. I slid the bleach bottles so every label looked forward. I adjusted the little plastic signs so no fractions of letters were cut off. I did the tasks the way you would for an inspection with new ownership and a rumor about needlessly high standards. I worked in a line because if I strayed, aisle 7 breathed and made itself longer. The green hoodie man showed up twice while I worked. Each time he stood at the end of an aisle with the same polite smile and asked for batteries. Each time he walked away before I could answer. On the second time, I looked down into his basket and saw my price tags resting neat and white in the bottom like teeth. I did not remember dropping them in there. He did not look down. He kept walking with that precise pace, like he had practiced it. I heard my manager's voice on the walkie again, counting seasonal, then a long pause and the click of a button tapping against a lip or a tooth. Need a count in aisle 7. The clip on the last word made my ears ring. That was when the thought came. It did not feel like mine. It felt like something I was allowed to borrow because I had finally earned it. The store was not growing at random. It was memorizing me. That was why the new bay of candy had the exact wrong brand in the exact right empty slot. That was why the price tags repeated the skew I corrected last week when I was too tired to double check. That was why the walkie asked for a count in aisle 7, because that is what I always did at that time if I had not fallen behind. The store had learned my rhythm, and now it was dragging me through it step by step until I matched its idea of a perfect close. I went to seasonal because a habit has to be broken at the bone. I climbed the little ladder and adjusted the paper lanterns so the seams faced backward. I taped the loose corners on a row of off-brand wrapping paper. I wrote the date on a sticky note for the end cap rebuild and set onto the top shelf where only employees ever look. When I climbed down, I heard footsteps behind the stockroom door. Slow, measured, the kind of pace a calm person takes when they know you are not going anywhere. I opened the door. The corridor felt longer. The pallet jack marks still pointed in. The emergency exit bar was cool now and gave a little when I pressed, then pressed back from the other side, gentle as a hand on my chest. I said out loud, because talking to a store is like talking to a dog that knows your tone. I am finishing the close. Then I will leave. If you need anything else, you can show me, but you will not keep me. People talk to houses. People talk to cars. That night, I talked to retail, square footage, and tile. I went to the counter and pulled the nightly checklist. I filled in every box with clean strokes. Trash, cardboard, end caps, seasonal, facing, bathrooms, mopping. I mopped with careful straight lines and wrung the mop head until the water ran clear. When I reached aisle 7, I set the bucket at the front and began the slow walk. The floor changed under my feet. The tile seams led where they were supposed to. The overhead signs settled to the height I knew from every shift. Bay after bay clicked into the shot of muscle memory that lives in a retail worker's spine. The extra candy base sagged like a balloon losing air and then was just gone. I faced the batteries last, pulling each pack clean to the edge until the SKU lines matched the printed price strip. The sound of a cart will squealed once and then stopped like the air had pinched it closed. A man stood at the end of the aisle. Green hoodie, hat brimlo. He did not speak. He lifted the basket and tipped it toward me so I could see what was inside. Price tags, not mine. 6 of them were yellowed with age. They had a style we stopped using years ago. An old stamp on one said "Manager Override" in a font we do not have anymore. The air around him felt cold in a way that reminded me of the walk-in cooler. I watched his lips open and saw a shape my brain wanted to finish for him. You know where the batteries are. The words did not come. A breath did. It smelled like hot dust and old cardboard and coffee that had gone cold against the desk while someone promised to stay and help. I remembered, with a bloom of shame I had glued into a blind spot. Years ago, a rush close. A new hire named Eli with a green hoodie and a polite way of not getting in the way. He had asked me 3 times where the batteries were that night because customers kept stopping him to ask. I had said aisle 7 without looking up from my count. He had gone back there and stayed late while I finished seasonal and felt proud about a perfect floor. He had clocked in. He had not clocked out. The system corrected it the next morning. The manager shrugged. People do that. I had not thought about it again. The man lifted the basket a little higher. The price tags inside shifted like paper fish. He set the basket down on the floor between us and took one slow step backward. Not away, backward, as if into position. His hat brim never lifted. The aisles breathed out. I could feel the store waiting. I bent and took the old tags. I set them on the counter under the camera bubble and smoothed them flat. I wrote the date in the corner. Not tonight's date. The date from that long ago shift. I wrote the names I remembered and the time the drawer came up short because we were rushing. I wrote the exact count from the old seasonal build that had made me proud. I made a little ledger of the night. I had forgotten to see the person standing next to me. When I looked up, the green hoodie man was gone. The air warmed enough that the smell of bleach from the freshly faced end cap made my eyes water. The walkie clicked, and my manager's real voice, rough with a yawn, said he had just pulled into the lot and would be in to help finish. I looked at the door. The lock turned under my hand like a well-trained trick. It opened on the first try. Dawn was not the right color. It was a little too thin, like milk with water in it. The strip mall looked the same, but the store to our left had a different sign. The payday loan place on the far end had a logo I had not seen in years. My manager came in with a coffee that smelled like a different brand than he buys now. He looked at me, then at the floor, and I saw him blink in the slow way you blink when your brain says save this and decide later if it happened the way it felt. We did the last check side by side without speaking. He signed the bottom of the sheet. I hit total on the register to run the morning tape, and the printer chattered out a neat white stream. The date at the top was not today. It was the date I had written on the old tags. The time was 5 minutes after the moment I remembered leaving Eli on aisle 7 a lifetime ago. My manager stared at the tape. He did not joke. He did not scoff. He folded it and slid it into the drawer like a pressed flower. We stood at the door and watched the parking lot fill with the first handful of cars that always arrive too early on a Sunday. A cartwheel squealed once from somewhere behind the stockroom door and then settled like a decision finally made. I worked 3 more closes at that Dollar Tree. I never heard the walkie ask for a count in aisle 7 again. The aisle kept its right number of bays. The cameras behaved like machines instead of mirrors. On my last night before I switched to days, I found a single old price tag under the register mat. It had the words manager override and a tiny smudge that might have been a fingerprint in dust. I tucked it into my apron pocket and took it home. Sometimes when I am in another store and I catch the smell of hot dust, I feel the aisle tilt a little. I stop and finish the task in my hands. I straighten the nearest thing. I face the shelf. There are places that learn you if you spend enough nights inside them. They will hold on if you let them. If they ask for a perfect close, give them one. If you hear a polite voice ask for batteries a second time, walk with him. Do not point. Do not look away. Walk. When the door opens in the morning, check the receipt. If the date is wrong, do not panic. It is only the store letting you know it remembers too. Story 2. The man who kept returning? I used to love the sound of our front door chime. It was gentle and cheap and cheerful. It made the store feel alive when the mall outside went quiet. On the night, he kept coming back. That sound turned into a tiny hammer. It knocked every time I took a breath. It knocked when I was sure the doors were locked. It knocked when the parking lot was a black pond. He came in first at 9:20. Gray coat that hung a little too straight. Hair a shade that could have been brown or dust. He kept his head tilted like he was listening for something behind the shelves. Basket in his right hand. Nothing inside it. He smiled at me without showing teeth and asked where we kept the small batteries. His voice was pleasant. It had the smile in it, even when his face did not move. Aisle 7, halfway down on the right, I said. He nodded like I had confirmed a fact he already knew. He walked with a steady pace. He did not look at the displays. He did not turn his head. He moved like a needle on a record that had one groove left to follow. He came back to the register with 2 button cells, an exact change in crumpled singles. His hands were clean. His nails were trimmed. He thanked me by name. I did not remember telling him my name, but my tag was on my apron, so I let it go. He slipped the tiny batteries into his coat pocket, said have a good night, and left. The door chimed. The parking lot swallowed him. I watched his reflection slide along the glass and vanish into the darkness that lives between cars after closing time. I went back to zoning the candy. I faced the bags so the labels lined up like a row of smiles. I listened to the lights hum and to the cooler rattle and to the distant echo of a cart while settling. At 9:35, the chime rang again. I looked up expecting a mom who forgot balloons or a teenager who wanted to ask what time we closed. It was the man in the gray coat. Same tilt of the head, same basket, same smile that did not move his face. He hesitated at the mat like he was checking the temperature of the air inside. Then he came in and asked where we kept the small batteries. Aisle 7, I said before I could stop myself. He nodded as if we had rehearsed it. He walked away. He bought the same 2 button cells with the same careful fingers. He paid in singles from the other pocket. He said, "Thank you, Scott." This time I felt the name hit harder. He did not glance at my tag. He did not need to. I checked the front doors after he left. They were unlocked because we were still open, but the latch fell a little tight when I pulled it. I told myself it was nothing. The mall air does that sometimes. I pressed the lock plate just to feel the click, then released it. I glanced up at the clock and told myself to breathe. 20 minutes to closing. I could count the drawers. I could finish my face-ups. I could be out by 11 if no one came in after 10. The door chimed at 9:50. He stood on the threshold, and the sound kept ringing like it had slipped and could not find its balance. He stepped forward and it stopped. He smiled with the same still mouth and lifted the empty basket with a small polite gesture like he was showing me he meant no harm. Where are the small batteries? The words did not rise and fall like a question. They laid flat. They waited. I pointed. He nodded. He walked. He bought the same 2 button cells. He paid with singles that were a little cleaner this time. He said, "Thank you, Scott," like he was reading it from a script with a tone note beside it. Warm, friendly, reassuring. I checked the security monitor because the grid of small cameras always steadied me. The top left showed the vestibule. The door stayed shut on the screen, even when the chime rang. I rewound 30 seconds. The monitor blinked and returned alive. I rewound again. The rewind bar moved, but the picture did not change. The vestibule remained empty. No one left. No one came in. The chime had rung. I had taken money. My hand smelled like the metallic tang bills leave when you count them fast. At 10, I locked the doors with both hands, pressed the plate, and tugged. Solid. I flipped the sign to closed. I turned the bolts because it makes me feel better even if it is only theater. I counted the drawers. I filled out the paperwork with the little boxes and the line for manager's signature. My manager had left early with a cough and a promise to check the cameras from home if I needed him. I told him I was fine. I always told him I was fine. I liked the quiet. I liked the way the aisles breathe when you're the last person in a fluorescent world. I started the trash. Aisle 1. Aisle 2. Party section. I lifted a small can and heard the chime. I did not look up. I kept my eyes on the rim of the trash can until the sound died. It rang once, then again, then a third time like the system had hiccups. I set the can down and walked to the front with a slow pace that made my ribs feel wide. The doors were still locked. The plates were still set. The sign still said closed. A reflection stood outside. Gray coat. Head tilted. He did not fog the glass when he breathed. He did not raise his hands to knock. He stood for a long time while the chime decided to rest. I wiped the glass with a cloth because doing a task is a way to talk to your fear without words. I cleaned a smudge that did not exist. The man did not move. I went back to aisle 7 because I could hear him ask the question in my head. It felt better to be there before he was. I stood with the batteries and waited, and that felt like I had made a choice. The chime rang. He did not come from the front. His footsteps came from the far end of the store by Seasonal. He rounded the corner with the basket and that polite smile and the still mouth. "Where are the small batteries?" "You already got some," I said. The words came out softer than I meant. He blinked. His eyes were a color that would be called blue on a form and gray on a cloudy afternoon. He looked down at the pegs like the answer might be printed there. He reached for the same 2 buttons. He put them in the basket. He held the basket like a child holds a toy when it is time to pretend. He walked back to the register without watching the floor. He paid with singles that were too crisp to have lived in his pocket. He thanked me by name. He left without pushing the door. He drifted through it like it had made room for him. I tried to joke out loud to the empty store. My laugh sounded wrong. I checked the cameras again. The vestibule feed showed a frozen picture of the door. The time code ticked. The man never appeared on the glass. The register camera showed me ringing up an empty counter. The item list on the side of the screen populated with 2 button cells and exact cash. The sales total blinked and cleared. The screen felt colder than the air on my fingertips. He came back for tape. He came back for a single lighter. He came back for candles that smelled like vanilla and dust. He came back for rope that we only carry once or twice a year for certain displays. Each time he greeted me by name. Each time he used a tone that matched the item. Warm for the candles. Practical for the tape. Flat for the rope. Each time he left without leaving and entered without arriving. I locked the doors a second time and a third. I pulled the gate that we only use when the mall is closing. It shuttered halfway and stuck. The chime rang behind it anyway. He stood on the other side of the gate and watched me through the bars like a patient person at a museum. His head tilted. The basket was empty again. "Where do you keep the small batteries?" "They are on aisle 7, I said, and the words tasted like a mistake. He nodded, and the gate rose by an inch without me touching it. He slid under in a way that did not bend him. He walked to aisle 7 while the chime decided whether to ring again and then fell quiet like it had been scolded. I pressed the walkie button to page the back room out of reflex. Nobody was there. I did it anyway. Manager to front for a guest. My voice sounded like someone else's recording. The walkie clicked once, then twice, and then gave me a thin breath of static that felt like a sigh held in a metal cage. I went to the stockroom and shut the door because it would feel stronger than glass when you were scared. I stood between racks of paper towels and boxes of fake flowers and listened. The chime rang. It rang again. It rang at a steady beat like a metronome. Footsteps moved along the front. They crossed the tile near the seasonal aisle. They passed the office. They paused at the stockroom door and then continued back toward the front. I counted them. I counted 7 sets before I realized I was counting my own trips from earlier in the night. I had walked that path with trash and with tape and with a stack of price tags that kept slipping. I did not want to open the door. I opened it anyway because I was not going to sleep in a room full of mop heads. The store looked the same and yet bigger, like a person standing in a familiar room after a haircut. The aisles felt sharper. The lights hummed in a key that hurt the space behind my eyes. He stood at the card aisle now. He ran his fingers along the envelopes without touching them. He picked up a sympathy card and put it back one slot to the left. He picked up a blank card and looked at the inside without moving his mouth. He selected a narrow roll of black ribbon and placed it in the basket with the care you give to a fragile thing that has already broken once. I stepped closer without thinking. I saw the edge of something under his sleeve. A hospital bracelet. The plastic had gone cloudy. The print had worn down until it looked like small rain. He noticed me noticing. He lifted his wrist and then let it fall. He did not hide it or offer it. He let me see the truth, but not the story. When he spoke, his smile did not move with the sound. It hung on his face like a picture hung a little crooked. "Scott," he said, and this time he did not ask for batteries. He told me a sentence, as if he had been waiting for the exact second in this loop to place it. "I need to finish before it gets dark." "It was already dark," I said. He tilted his head like he was listening to someone behind me. He waited. His eyes did not blink for too long. Then he nodded as if someone had given him a cue and carried the basket to the register. The receipt printer chattered. The paper slid out in a slow curl. The item list did not match what was on the counter. It listed batteries, tape, candles, rope, lighter, ribbon, sympathy card, blank card, and 2 small bottles of water. The total came to a number that felt like a date. I could not place it, and that made my chest hurt. He waited for his change with the patience of someone who has practiced waiting. I handed him coins I did not remember touching. He closed his fist and looked down at it like he was trying to memorize the weight. He opened his hand. It was empty. He did not look surprised. I should have asked more questions. I should have said, "Are you all right?" I should have said, "Who is the card for?" I should have said, "Do you need me to call someone?" I did not ask. The store at night can make a coward of you without ever raising its voice. He left without leaving. He entered without arriving. He appeared where the chime wanted him, and he did what the loop demanded. Each pass were the floor a little smoother. Each pass made my stomach feel a little colder. At 4 in the morning, the air changed. The mall has a false dawn before the sun. The air handlers click over. The lights in the hall outside flicker on for the first janitor. The sound comes like rain behind the walls. When that shift happened, he paused at the threshold between aisles. He cocked his head and listened to it. His mouth softened. The smile moved a fraction. He set the basket down on the floor, like a person returning a borrowed book. He looked at me as if we had done good work together. "You're closing," he said. I nodded. "I am too," he said, and this time the words were his and not the loop. He stepped back. He did not turn. He faded like a wet footprint drying on warm tile. 1 second, he was there with the hospital bracelet and the ribbon and that polite smile that never reached his eyes. The next, he was a reflection in the door glass where a man in a gray coat walked toward his car with a bag of small things that mattered to him. The reflection kept walking into the dark slice of space between 2 dead parking lot lights. Then there was only me and the smell of vanilla from the candle that had opened itself on the counter. I stood still until the printer clicked. It fed a receipt, even though I had not pressed total. The paper curled like a ribbon. It printed a list with no spacing errors and a timestamp that did not match the clock on the wall. Every item he had bought that night was on it, all together, in the order a person might gather them when they're thinking about the worst thing and trying to make small plans against it. The total came to the number that felt like a date. The ink made it plain. The date was a Tuesday from 3 years ago. There had been a storm that night. The power had flickered at closing time. A man had been struck in the lot by a car that did not stop. The newspaper had called it a tragedy. The store had called a mess, and the mall had called for extra cleanup. I pressed the paper flat with my palm. My hand left a faint print where sweat met thermal ink. I folded it and slid it into the drawer like a pressed leaf. I did not call my manager. I did not want to explain a receipt that had printed for a sale that belonged to a version of our store with ceiling tiles we had replaced and a register we had retired. Dawn arrived the way it always does. Thin, pale, a kind of forgiveness baked into it. The first cars rolled past the front. The lone place on the corner flicked on their neon sign. I turned the key on the door and felt the lock give like a stubborn mouth, untightening. I did not flip the sign yet. I watched the light find the aisles. I listened to the cooler settle. I breathed. The chime rang once. Soft. A mistake. The doors were still locked. The sound touched the air and faded. I looked up without fear for the first time in hours. The vestibule was empty. The monitor showed the blank, boring truth of a store that has shelves and a person to keep them straight. I walked to aisle 7 and set the button cells in their proper place. I pressed the packs to the edge with a clean line. I put the tape with the tape and the candles with the candles and the ribbon with the ribbon. I threw away the empty basket. I stood at the register and waited for the clock to catch up with the morning. We opened. The first customer asked for balloons and a frame. I smiled with my whole mouth. I counted their change twice. I watched them leave. I watched the chime behave like a normal bell in a normal door. I still hear him sometimes. Not the loop, not the flat line he spoke from. I hear his last sentence, the one he set aside for when the air changed. I need to finish before it gets dark. I keep a pack of button cells behind the counter for people who do not know the right aisle. I walk them there. I point with my whole hand. I do not let them go alone across the store if they look a little lost. Most nights are dull. Some nights the chime stutters. When it does, I look at the clock and wait. If it rings a third time in the same minute, I whisper a thank you that does not need a reason. I check the door. I straighten the nearest shelf. I keep an eye on the parking lot when I take out the trash. I do not step between the cars without a pause. I do not assume the dark will be kind just because it has been lately. If you work a night shift long enough, the store will ask things from you that are not in any manual. Patience, noticing, the shape of a man you did not save and could not have saved and would have tried anyway if someone had said the right words at the right time. The store will keep a receipt with a date that is not today as a quiet way to remember. The chime will ring once in an empty room. You will say his name even if you never learned it. You will face the batteries and leave one small space open like a chair at a table that is always set. Story 3. The Stockroom Whispers. I heard my name first like a mistake in the air. Not spoken across the room. Not breathed from mouth. It felt like a finger pressed behind my ear and traced the sound into my head. Scott. It came while I was alone in the stockroom with a box cutter and a checklist and the smell of cardboard that sticks to your tongue. I stood up straight and knocked my shoulder on a shelf I had walked around 100 times. The sound of metal on bone made the other sounds fall back. The cooler thumped. The lights buzzed. Somewhere on the sales floor, a peg hook settled with a tiny click. The whisper did not repeat. It did not have to. It had already taken a place next to my name and my own thoughts. The shift had started like every closing shift starts. Manager left after the last rush, promising to check the numbers in the morning. The mall had gone quiet. The front doors felt thin under my hand when I locked them at 10. I did the drawer count with the steady math that gets you to 0. Then I went to the back because the back never ends. There's always one more box, one more label, one more pallet nozzle that leaks air with a sigh when you move it. The stockroom at night is a world made of a few things. Cardboard that looks like walls when you stack it high enough. Cleaning chemicals that turn the air sharp. The hot, sweet dust that comes from shrink wrap and tape when you cut it fast. It is not a bad place if you keep it moving. I cut open a case of green scrubbing sponges and set them into a gray tote. I cut open a case of dish soap and parked it by the door. I wrote the counts in the little boxes on the clipboard. I shut my brain down to the part that counts and moves and stacks. Scott. The second whisper slid out of the corner where the damaged goods live. It was faint and close at the same time. I turned so fast the box cutter squeaked against the cement floor. Nothing moved. The mop bucket stared at me with a black circle of water. The ladder leaned where it always leans. I let out a breath like I was blowing dust off an old postcard. You get tired enough, and your own thoughts put on a voice to get your attention. I went back to the boxes. I finished the sponges. I started the dish soap. A stack of seasonal toppers slipped. It was a small sound. I looked. The toppers did not fall. Instead, a roll of clear tape that had been sitting upright rolled across the floor. Not fast, not far, just a slow, steady turn like someone had given it a careful push. It reached the threshold line where the stockroom tile changes to the smoother store tile, and it stopped with the sticky side facing upward, as if waiting to be used. I tried to laugh and heard nothing behind it. You can joke with a coworker when the tape does something on its own. You cannot joke with a room that sets a tool where you will need it next. I took the tape and set it on a box so it would not roll again. The whisper came from the other ear this time. Scott. The breath of it was cool. The syllables sat inside my head like a drop of water that had fallen through the ceiling. I told myself I needed noise. I went to the office and toggled the radio we keep for bad nights. It hissed with nothing. I turned it off because the hiss made the quiet feel crowded. I opened the file cabinet to pull the nightly forms. The top drawer stuck halfway. It always sticks. I gave it a bump on the right side where the track warps and it slid open. The first folder in the drawer was not the nightly forms. It was a thin manila folder stamped with an old store logo and a date that had been rubbed nearly smooth. The tab read personnel. That drawer does not hold personnel. It holds forms. I stared at it until the feeling behind my ears made me lift the folder out. Inside was a single sheet and a photocopy of a photocopy that had been copied again until the toner ran light. The sheet was a write-up from years ago. It listed a closing shift. It listed an inventory variance. It listed a name at the top that I did not recognize until my eyes found the bottom where the manager's signature used to live. The name at the top was handwritten. It had the shape of the name I had been hearing. Eli. The copy was a grainy black and white of smiling kid in a green hoodie standing near aisle 7 with a roll of tape in his hand. The caption under it said, "Training Day." The copier line had chopped the faces on either side of him into gray teeth. The page smelled like old toner and paper left too close to a heater. The whisper said my name again and then said another one. Eli. It was not my thought. It was a statement. The sound of it made my shoulders lose their tension by an inch, the way hearing any name feels like proof that the world is still about people and not just tasks. I took the folder with me back into the stockroom. I set it on the clipboard as if the paper wanted the paper. The next thing that happened is small when you tell it, and big when you live it. The stack of dish soap I had just built changed shape. Not in a jump, not in a slide. I blinked, and the boxes were in a cleaner stack than I make when I am at my best. Every corner aligned, every seam pressed shut. The gap I had left to squeeze the last case in was gone because the last case had been tucked perfectly into the hole. I had not moved it. I would have remembered moving it. The tape that had rolled to the doorway sat neatly on top of the last box with the tail folded under so it would not stick. Scott. The whisper came from behind the mop sink. It was not one whisper now. It was two, then three. They overlapped, as if the room held more heads than bodies. The quality changed. Some of the voices sounded like my own voice played on a small speaker. Some sounded like the way a person's voice gets thin when they're talking down a hallway. One voice was so close it filled my ear canal and made me swallow. Leave. Another voice arrived in the same space inside my head and repeated the word like it had learned it only recently and did not trust it yet. Leave. The group of them answered with a hiss that might have been a SHHHH or might have been the sound of inventory shrinking on a spreadsheet. I took a step toward the door, and the air pressed back like the store had full hands. Not a hard push. More like a suggestion you could ignore if you were bold. I was not bold. I was efficient. I set the box cutter down and started to work faster because my brain told me a story where finishing the job would make the room like me enough to let me go. A pile of flattened boxes against the wall lifted by a fraction and then settled. Not enough to slide. Enough to show that weight can change without hands. The ladder knocked once against the rack and then stopped as if someone had told it no. The whispers multiplied. Some of them followed my movements by a beat, as if repeating my breathing to learn the right rhythm. One of them started saying numbers. Not full counts. Fragments. 7, 4, 58, 10. The numbers matched the counts on my clipboard. I went to the door anyway. I pushed out into the sales floor because bright light feels like safety even when it hums a little wrong. The aisles were straight and boring and normal. Then they were not. The door at the far end felt a step farther away with every pace. The aisle numbers looked correct, and yet the distance between the numbers spread like cold water across tile. I tried to walk faster. The air got thicker and my breath went shallow. The whispers came with me through the back door, climbing into the space between the overhead signs and the ceiling. They gathered in the angles where the end caps meet. They gathered in the convex mirrors until the mirrors showed a blur instead of the neat stretch I expected. They herded me with kindness. That is the strangest truth. They did not shout. They did not say my name like a threat. They did not move things to block my path. They leaned the distance, they tilted the floor, and they put a cool breath against my ear like a teacher placing 2 fingers on a page to show the line you should start at. They turned me back toward the stockroom. I set my hand on the stockroom door and felt the temperature change through the wood. Colder, not winter. Cooler like an air conditioner had been turned on in a room that never gets enough. The whispers quieted for a heartbeat, like the intake before speech. I opened the door. The room did not look different. The room felt different the way your bedroom feels different after someone has been in it and moved nothing. Space gets a kind of charge. The shadow in the far corner was just a shadow until a part of it was not. The not shadow had the shape of a person standing with their weight on one foot, a tilt that belonged to someone who had stood for a living. The outline sharpened like breath drying on glass. It did not step forward. It let me see it inch by inch. The mouth moved first, as if it had been waiting the longest to be used. When it opened, the sound was not a voice alone. It was a braid of whispers layered on top of a deeper tone that might have been the building itself using the drain pipes to speak. Finish the shift. Not a demand, not a plea. A statement broken into 3 small sentences that landed one after the other and sat there like items on a list. I realized my hands were already reaching for the next box. I realized my body had been finishing the shift while my fear told me to run. I realized the shadow was not threatening me. It was instructing me with the authority of a list on a clipboard. I said a name into the cool air because the folder in the office had put the sound in my mouth. Eli. The shadow tightened, like a person flinching when they hear a memory. The layered voices repeated the name with the tenderness of someone checking a spelling. Eli. The cooler thumped as if it agreed. I stepped closer, 3 slow steps that put me in the same aisle of shelving. The edges of the figure grew clearer. Shoulders, hat brim, the slope of a hood resting against the neck. The right hand hung empty, fingers curled around nothing, like someone who has carried a roll of tape too many nights and still holds it when it's gone. You never clocked out, I said. It felt foolish to say, like telling the tide it forgot to stop. The whispers answered in a dozen versions of yes and no and almost. The deeper tone beneath them breathed a single word that sounded like metal warming. Stay. No, I said with more courage than I felt. I will not stay, but I will finish. The lights over the sink brightened by a shade that only someone who lives under those lights would notice. The shadow did not smile. The edges of it eased. The voices thinned until they sounded like one person repeating a sentence to themselves, so they do not forget. Finish the shift. I finished it like a person who knows they're being watched by a patient teacher. I built the stacks with perfect seams. I faced every case, so the labels read like a line of little flags. I counted with my lips moving so the whispers could match my pace. When I needed tape, the roll was where I reached without looking. When I needed the marker, it sat on the rail cap with the tip down and the cap snug. The mop bucket was filled to the right line without me touching the faucet. A part of me waited for the punch. The scare. The hand on my shoulder. It did not come. The store breathed with me. The shadow stayed in its corner and adjusted the air by 0.5 degrees so the sweat cooled and did not sting. The voices repeated my numbers and corrected me once when I skipped a box. The correction felt like a gentle tap on the back of my hand. I said thank you out loud because manners do not cost anything and ghosts might care more than people do. When I wrote the last count and snapped the pin clip onto my apron, the room changed shape. Not by much, just enough that the corner shadow belonged to a corner again. The layered voice unbraided. One voice remained. It did not sound like a speaker. It did not sound like pipes. It sounded like a tired person finding the right word after searching too long. Thank you. You can go, I said. It felt like the right answer. The shadow tilted its head the way a person tilts when they're listening to a sound that is not for you. The hallway outside the stockroom made a soft, hollow noise. It is the sound the mall makes before the janitors come in, a small whine through the vents that imitates dawn. The figure thinned. The edges loosened. The hand that held nothing opened and let go of air. Finish the shift. It said it once more. Then the sound fell through the floor like water through grating. I stayed in the stockroom because leaving felt wrong. I swept the floor in straight lines and banged the dustpan twice on the lip of the can. I tied the trash with the right knot the first time. I slid the ladder into its place and felt the exact clack of it landing against the stop. I put the clipboard on the hook. The page behind it had writing I had not put there. Not scrawled. Not messy. Neat like someone practicing. It said stockroom complete and then the date from years ago. The signature line was filled with a name that matched the folder. The ink was pale as if it had been left in sun and lost most of itself. I did not take the page down. I did not take the folder back out of the office. I left them where they belonged because some things belong to the room more than they belong to you. I went to the sales floor and walked the aisles without counting distance. The floor did not stretch. The door did not drift. The mirrors reflected angles that matched me instead of softening into smudges. I unlocked the front at 6 because our store opens earlier on Saturdays. The key turned like something agreeing to end a conversation. The mall outside smelled like someone had mopped the world. The light coming through the glass had its ordinary straw color. When my manager came in with a coffee seal still snapped, he stopped at the stockroom door and looked back at me. He did not joke. He did not say a ghost storyline. He said, "It looks good back there." He said it like he was surprised to hear his own voice use that tone. He found a clipboard a minute later. He stood within his hands and read the top page twice. Then he peeled it back and read the old note under it without touching. He blinked the slow blink people use when a fact asks for room and the day is already scheduled. He set the clipboard on the hook with care. He asked me if I had written anything extra. I told him I had finished the shift. I told him the stockroom was clean. I did not tell him about voices and drains and tape that rolls itself to the right spot. I did not tell him how a shadow can love a checklist harder than a person does. At the end of my stretch on closes, I switched to days because the morning makes even haunted spaces behave. On my last night, I left a note on the clipboard in my own hand. Stockroom complete. No date. No signature. Just a sentence. The next week, the morning crew found a second line in similar careful writing, but a different hand. Thank you. It was ink faded to the color of dish soap, labels left in sun. Every so often I hear my name in a store that is not ours. Grocery. Hardware. A place with ceiling fans turning slow above dusty aisles. It comes like a thought grown a voice. When it happens, I straighten whatever is nearest. I finish the task I'm doing even if I just started it. If I am in the back, I sweep from the far corner toward the door. If I am in the front, I walk the path that makes the least sense and then do the thing that matters next instead of what my list says. The whisper fades when you respect the floor. If you ever find yourself alone with a box cutter in a room that knows your name, do the work like someone is memorizing you to survive. Count out loud. Thank the air for the correction. Tape the last seam clean and fold the tail under. Put the clipboard where it lives. When the sound in the corner says finish the shift, let it be a kindness. The door will open when it is ready. Morning will still come. The receipt will print a time that makes no sense, and you do not need it to. Some people leave their shape where they labored. Some places keep that shape until someone arrives who can set it down gently. If you're that person, be careful and be exact. The Stockroom or Dollar Tree is quiet these days. Sometimes the tape is already on the box. Sometimes a marker sits waiting with its cap snug. Sometimes a pallet jack track points inward again, then fades before my next pass. If I listen hard, I can almost catch the tail of a sentence as it slides under the door. Not my name, not a warning, just a small, satisfied sound a person makes when a long list is finally complete.